Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to a beautiful sunny morning in the Rocky Mountains. How's it going, guys? We are live, it looks like, so we're good to go.
Yes, yes, yes.
Good morning, Jan. How are you? Good
I'm
afternoon.
well. Mm.
Good. Hey, Boguslav, how you doing? And Carlos, welcome. Everybody, welcome, welcome. Make sure we have everything going here. Comment, private chat. Good morning. Yeah, we'll just kind of watch that YouTube. I know it's. I guess I didn't really realize that it's an American holiday today, the 4th of July, Independence Day. But um, I know we don't really. It's another day to me. So, but it's beautiful up here. It's about 18 degrees Celsius, about 66 degrees Fahrenheit, and sunny. A little breeze coming from the west, from the mountains over there. It's nice here. It's beautiful. So, good morning. How you doing? Good morning. Good morning. That's good to see everybody. That's great. Yeah, I didn't know if we were going to have anybody. I just realized here a minute ago. Hey, it's the 4th of July. I wonder if anybody's going to show up. But so I got Jan. You brought up something interesting. I just briefly saw it this morning. You're using your little paintbrushes on your plates.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about that. If you want to talk about that, I'd like to explain to people what you're doing there. It's kind of interesting. I had somebody query about that and say, What's he doing?" Let me see if I can switch this around here. Not that one. How do we do this? Yeah. So explain to everybody what you're doing there.
Uh, this is a negative. I only use it black glass, no a black acrylic painted glass.
Right. Okay.
So it's very light. So I want some more dark and contrasty. So I just wait for 1 hour, and the collodion is still soft. Then I brush it to make it more dark.
So what are you doing there when you brush it? What's actually happening? Do you know?
Yes, I take away a little silver.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes it's coming silver also like fog, because I overexpose it a little because I want the negative. So I brush it away, the silver away, to get more blacks.
For clear glass, because he's making a negative. So he's saying he brushes the silver away in the shadow areas, allowing all the light to penetrate and go through the glass and hit the print. So then on top of that, when you do not only the shadow areas, but if you take a brush and you do the highlight areas, especially on a positive, you can burnish the silver and shine it up. So you can clear the glass. If you've overdeveloped, you can clear the glass of any of the silver and have it pure clear glass, which will be dark. Yeah. Like his bottle caps there, it looks like. And then if he wants to go on the highlight of the silver, he can burnish the silver with a brush too. Some people use their finger. You can burnish the silver. You basically polish it, right? That's what you do. You polish the silver. So when I saw that and somebody queried, there you go. There's his brush set. Yeah. So somebody queried about what is he doing there? Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. You've got to be really careful doing it, but it works really well. If you have a little bit of veiling, remember last time we talked about if you overdevelop, you'll have some veiling, you'll have some unexposed silver that develops. You can take and clear that off. You can use a cotton ball, a brush, you can use your finger. You can be a little more precise if you use the brush or cotton ball, those kinds of things. So, but yeah, that's good. That's great to see that, because at the end of the day,
I got something here also today.
Okay.
And that's when I finish this.
Yeah.
You see.
Oh, nice. Yep. Yep. There's some real subtlety in that one, it looks like. That'll be a good one for you to work on.
Yes,
Yeah, excellent. Yes.
I'll do the same.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
All that silver around that leaf, and then that leaf's dark and it's got some tone range. That looks good, Jan. That looks really good exposure. Boguslas says, can we retouch dust marks on collodion negative like normal? So typically for negatives, on collodion negatives, if you want to touch up the negative, what you can use a lead pencil. A lot of times, especially like on dry plates too, I've seen this quite a bit. You'll put apply a little bit of a tooth to it. We call it a tooth in English, that'll hold that lead. So think about it. If you take a negative and you put lead on that negative, what you're doing is you're blocking the light. So you're creating shadows, right? You're creating or highlights. Sorry, you're creating highlights. You're blocking the light, so it will be white. So if you had specks around or you had wrinkles on a face, I think I've shown this before, but I have a couple of old dry plates where they've sprayed a tooth on it, meaning they apply a material that will allow the lead or the pencil to adhere to the plate, and you can block those wrinkles, the spots you can touch up. It is a lot like retouching a negative back in the day for sure, but it's a little bit different because you don't want to scratch the other silver away or take it off. What you want to do is apply the lead to do pinholes or to do wrinkles. I see it a lot on just cleaning up plates that you want to print out. There you go. Yeah, just a lead pencil.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I can't remember. I can't remember the product. I'll look it up. I'll find it. I can't remember the product that if you spray or apply this product onto the emulsion side of the negative, and you use a lead pencil, it's like drawing on paper. You can literally block out or clean up anything you want. It works really well. It was very, very popular in the 19th century. I myself have always liked the process as long as I'm technically strong. Wrinkles and blemishes and all those kinds of things, I don't mind. Every once in a while, it would be kind of nice to be able to get in there and clean something up. But most of the time, you get a print close enough to where you want to get it that, people use it, though, if they want. They can increase contrast, kind of like what Jan's doing with his brush, cleaning out the void areas of his plate, making it clear glass. You can increase the contrast with lead pencils or doing the changing the actual image. It's kind of like manipulating kind of a 19th century Photoshop, right? So it was very popular to do that. People had a lot of time on their hands. So, but yeah, no, it works well. That's good. That's very good. It's always a a little bit of a gamble once you start playing with negatives and you're manipulating the emulsion on them or the collodion side on them. It's always a little bit of a gamble of actually damaging them quite bad. So when you start doing stuff like this, not what Jan's doing, where he's taking a brush and just clearing that overdeveloped or developed silver, unexposed developed silver out of the void areas, and we always have just a tiny bit of that. So even if you take your brush or a cotton ball or your finger or whatever, and you clear those void areas out, you will pop that contrast up a little bit even still. But it's always a gamble once you take a pencil or something to that collodion side of the image of damaging that. So you want to practice on kind of experimental images, right? You want to play around with a little bit before you get super serious with it. It works well, though. It really does. So I wanted to bring that up because I saw you posted that. I just briefly got to see. I saw a little video of you just taking your brush, and someone asked, "What is he doing there?" And I said, "Well, let's ask him." And that's right. He's clearing those void areas out. And again, on positives, if you take a positive on metal, on alumatype or tin type, ferrotype, whatever, take the highlight areas, where the silver is. You take your finger cotton ball or whatever, you can burnish that silver, and you can really shine that silver up and make it very, I've done a lot of those very interesting images. It has to be quite a a little bit overexposed, because when you burnish it or you brush it down, it'll lose a little bit of that contrast. But some of them they're really beautiful. So you can make them really gorgeous that way, if that's the aesthetic you're into. So what else do we have going on here? Let me pop over here. Yeah, so we have somebody asked last week, or maybe it was even the week before, and I missed this, but people were asking about varnishing, and they wanted to know the difference between using shellac, using gum sandrack, using a modern varnish like a the brand name slips my mind now. The modern varnish, Liquitech. There's a couple of different names. So I wanted to briefly explain the difference in varnishing, explain a little bit about what varnishing is for, and then the different varieties you have, and why some people choose one type of varnish over another type of varnish. And so we'll start with what is varnishing for. You have a plate. It doesn't matter if it's a positive or a negative. You have a plate that has highlights, midtones, and shadows, either void air, clear glass, black metal, whatever it is, plastic, and the highlights of the silver. The highlights of the silver and the midtones will be exposed to the air, the oxygen, the air, everything in the air. Depending on where you live, sometimes that air, the pollution in the air, will contain a lot of sulfites, a lot of pollution. And just like your silverware, your grandma's silverware, your great-grandmother's silverware, it used to tarnish. So you have this silverware cleaner, this tarnish remover. What that tarnish is that silver is interacting with the sulfites in the air and forming silver sulfite. Silver sulfite is black. It starts out to be brown or light yellow, and then it'll eventually go down to a black, and you'll tarnish your silver. Well, we can't use tarnish cleaner on plates, so we need to protect that silver. And the best way to protect that silver is to use a varnish on it. Now, there's a lot of debate on what the best varnish to use is, and I really personally think it depends on where you live, what your purpose is for the image, and your time frame. Like what I mean by that, if you're trying to get prints out, or you're trying to get a product to a person, a positive image, a portrait you made, or whatever. So let me explain. Let's start with the gum sandrack. The gum sandrack varnish is primarily what I use. It's not exclusively necessarily to what I use, but the gum sandrack, probably 95% of the time I use the gum sandrack. Why do I use the gum sandrack? Well, gum sandrack is a sap, basically a tree sap, that you dissolve in alcohol and you add some lavender oil to. So the varnish consists of alcohol, some kind of sap compound, or some kind of varnish, the varnish itself, in this case gum sandrack, and lavender oil. And lavender oil acts as a plasticizer. It keeps the varnish flexible, quote unquote, over the years, keeps those spider cracks out of it. It keeps it from cracking and breaking, basically hardening and then cracking, and you get the little spider cracks in it. So the plasticizer is important, and the varnish itself, in this case the gum sandrack, very important. What does it do? Well, in theory, it covers the silver and protects it from those sulfites. It also has, if you look at this, it has some UV protection as well, just a little bit. It protects the actual image itself. You can put your plates under water, it won't hurt them, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really good sealant or protector for the silver, and that's what you're trying to do. So what's the downside of gum sandrack? Gum sandrack was used predominantly in the 19th century, but along with shellac, there's some other compounds that didn't work as well, but shellac and gum sandrack were primarily the most commonly used varnishes. Hello, Linda. Welcome. Good to see you. And those two varnishes protected the image, allowed the image to be handled. And now think about this, not so much positives, but negatives. You make a negative, and if you don't varnish it and you handle it and you're printing it, I guarantee you, after you do a couple of contact prints, you're going to have marks on your silver. It's really delicate. So it's really important to varnish the negatives because you're going to be handling them, putting them up against paper, all that stuff. So negatives are very important to varnish, just for the handling purposes. Positives are also important to varnish because you do handle them, you're going to mount them, that kind of stuff. But also, the reason I use gum sandarac is my wet positives, wet, coming out right out of the wash pan after I made them, will look 99.9% exactly the same way when they're varnished. Now, I know over the years, people have spun that yellow color out of the sap. Using carbon and centrifuge spinning that out, you can clear that gum sandarac varnish to where they call it blonde, or they call it, very light. That will not, they say it darkens the image. It doesn't really darken the image. What it does is add that yellow kind of coffee cream color that you had when it was wet to it. A lot of times people will have an underexposed image. It dries, we call dried bright. It'll gain a stop or a stop and a half from being wet. When it dries up, it'll be bright. Oh my God, that's perfect. And sometimes in the 19th century, a portrait would be made, the photographer would underexpose a little bit, the image would dry up, and the customer would leave it like that, leave it like that. So if you varnish those, it'll go back down to that wet color and lose that gain of a stop or maybe even a stop and a half, depending on the exposure and development. So you need to have your exposures on, and you should judge your pre-varnished image as wet for the positive. Now the negative, it's a little different story. The negative is a more practical use, not so much aesthetic, meaning that your negative isn't going to lose or gain necessarily, not always, but lose or gain anything aesthetically in the printing process. The positives you will. So sometimes people will say, no, I don't want that yellowing, or I don't want that color shift or that darkening. So they'll go to a clear, a shellac, or they'll go to a modern Liquitech varnish that has no color to it. And those are great, and they work great. It just depends on your particular need or desire to what you're trying to accomplish. There's no varnish necessarily better than any other. The one caveat that I would put on this would be that the modern varnishes, the Liquitechs and those kinds of things, we really haven't had the century and a half use of them. So we really don't know the archival quality of them. I'm sure they're fine, but we don't have that kind of empirical data saying, wow, they've used this for 160 years. We're making it the same way, blah, 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 like the gum or the shellac. So there's a little bit of question there. I don't think it's anything we have to worry about. We'll be dead, long gone by the time anything probably would ever happen. The other downside to the modern varnishes are they smell terrible. I mean, it's a very profound chemical smell on the Liquitech and some of the other modern varnishes. They're great. They take a long time to dry and cure. And also they have, sometimes the application's a little difficult to get right, because you pour it on, you pour it off, and if you don't drain them long enough and you turn it back, you'll get a big ridge, or you'll get funky unevenness of the varnish. So you have to practice with the modern varnish a little more than the shellac or the gum, the more traditional on, off, heat, set that. And then the final thing is drying and curing. Now, a lot of times people don't understand that there's a difference between having a plate dry and a plate that's cured. And I want to explain this just a little bit, because it's really important. And I've had myself in the past lost images because the plate was dry, but it cured. And what I mean by Dry is that you can touch it, it feels perfectly fine, it's no problem, blah, 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 but it's not cured. What curing means is, remember, typically you have about 5% water in your alcohol that you put in your varnish. And let's just, for this example, let's just use the gum or the shellac type varnish, where you're using the alcohol to dissolve that. And shellac comes from the female lac bug. It's actually an insect shit, if you will. For the insect feces. Sorry. And those are dissolved in alcohol. The gum, the tree sap, and the bug stuff is dissolved in alcohol, and that alcohol has 5% water in it. So when you pour it on your plate, you drain it off, you heat it up. It's dried in 20 or 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe an hour. To the touch, it feels dry, but it's not cured. And curing means that you're actually allowing the last little bit of that water to get out of that varnish. So it's actually, the plasticizer can take a hold and keep it flexible. There's no water in it, so the gum or the shellac isn't soft anymore. And what I mean by soft is that if you were to take and varnish a plate today and have it feel dry, and tomorrow you start stacking something on that plate, and especially if it's warm, you'll have something stick to that. You'll have paper or another plate or whatever. When it's not cured, it's not hardened, and it's not complete. So here in Colorado, my plates take about 3 or 4 days to cure. In a more humid place, it might take a week or 10 days. It just depends. I would go, if you're above 40 or 50% humidity, I would probably go a week before I start handling those plates like they're complete. So a lot of times people will have the varnish right, the good application of the varnish, right, aesthetic, right, whatever outcome, and then too soon they start stacking or storing the plates, and they're not cured. Be sure to let them cure. That's really important. Not just dried, but cure. So people were asking me, I think it was a week prior to that, and I didn't get to this, and they reminded me a few days ago, talk about the varnish and what is the varnish. And I know we reiterate a lot of this stuff, but it's hard to keep every single step and all the nuances of the step, from developer to silver to the varnish to the types of techniques we use, the type of compounds we use, why we use them. It's hard to keep all that together. So we like to reiterate and remind people that varnishing, you go through all that work, make your chemistry, go to the scene, make the photograph of the person, whatever it is, develop it right, do everything right, you varnish it, and you screw it up. And the other thing they asked too, they said, talk about melting images. So real quickly, melting images, when varnish, what happens when you're varnishing an image and it just melts away? Has anybody had that happen? I'm sure you have. It's one of those typical I don't know what it, maybe a typical technical problem. You have your image, you pour your varnish on, and it just kind of melts away. Sometimes it's kind of cool, and most of the time it's not very cool at all, because it's a heartbreak. What is happening there? So 2 things, and this is really important to remember. The older the collodion, the more red the collodion is. The highly iodized collodion, if you remember those kind of technical terms, the highly iodized collodion, the nitrocellulose, I don't want to say becomes weak, but becomes more vulnerable to solvents. So you have highly iodized collodion, or you have some older collodion, you make the image, everything looks great, and then you use an alcohol or a varnish with a higher alcohol content, like a 96% alcohol, or a fresh varnish that you just made that has 96, 97% alcohol. You pour that varnish on that highly iodized collodion plate, and it melts. It basically melts the nitrocellulose. That's what it does. The silver goes along with it because it's suspended in that and on top of that, so it just melts away. What is the solution to that? You can still use your old red collodion. That's not a problem. What you need to do is temper down your varnish. And how you do that is you use distilled water. And I recommend people start with 5 or 10 drops in 250 mils of the varnish. Start with 5 or 10 drops of distilled water. test the plate, make a plate, test it, and you'll get that varnish mellowed out by adding enough water. You don't want too much, but you want enough so it balances out that alcohol and it doesn't melt that nitrocellulose. Temper down that varnish so it doesn't melt those images away. I've only had it happen a couple of times. I like to use the 95% ethanol, so I'm pretty consistent with that. There are times though, you know, we don't manufacture the collodion, and the way it ages and iodized, you know, I had, man, it was a few years ago. It was for the month of photography in Denver. They asked me to do some demos, and I did 16 by 20 portraits, 40 by 50 centimeter portraits in my big camera. And I varnished, I poured the varnish on the first one. It was fine, no problem. Made another portrait, poured the varnish on, and just melded the entire, it was a beautiful portrait too. And it was heartbreaking. So it's really like, well, how did that happen? I don't know. I can't tell you. Maybe the temperature changed. There were a couple of hours difference. I don't know. I don't know. But I wish, you know, it was a little older collodion, of course, like I said. But I wish I would have known that was the case. And you can't always test this stuff, so you kind of gamble on it a little bit. You know, like I said last week. We're all gambling a little bit working in this process, which is kind of fun too. But those kind of heartaches are really tough. Those breaks when you spend all the time and energy, and then the last step, the varnishing step, either have something like that happen, or you don't let the plate cure and you get it all marked up, or you have dust spots, or you have orange peel, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of problems in varnishing. Mostly it's environmental. And even the orange peel, the humidity, the high humidity levels will make it look like an orange peel. Dust, people, there's been a couple of people that say, hey, I don't like to use an open flame, so I use a hair dryer and I dry my plate down, and they kick a bunch of dust, micro dust up in the air they can't see, and then they varnish and they have millions of little spots and hairs, and it doesn't take much. We get those little fish gills and all kinds of stuff in the varnish. You don't even see the material that's causing the problem, and you'll see a problem on the varnish. Fortunately, a lot of times if they're positives, you can put them face up, hit them with light, frame them up, and you'll never see that. The only time you'll see the kind of dust spots and all the imperfections if you let kind of the side light or the oblique light hit it and you see the surface of the varnish. It's very sensitive. It is. And varnishing, I've had people frightened of varnishing their plates, and they stack them up, but dozens and dozens of plates that they haven't varnished because they're afraid of ruining them. What's going to happen is they're going to ruin them by not varnishing them. Eventually, that sulfide will get to them. Even if you live out in the country or whatever, they might last a year or two, but eventually, if you live in a city or near pollution, they're going to go fast. They're going to start turning dark quite rapidly. So the one last thing about protecting that image, what if, for instance, you have a portrait or a scene that you've underexposed, you can't get the person back, you can't go to the scene again, whatever it is, and you've underexposed a little bit, it dries up and it's a perfect exposure for you, and you don't want to varnish it. How can you protect that image? Here's my recommendation. What you do is you take a piece of clear glass, cut it, clean it, just like you were going to pour it for a collodion, and you put it on top of that collodion side of the underexposed image, and then use archival tape to seal that up, and don't allow oxygen or air to get to that. I have one from, I'm going to guess, the early 1870s that wasn't varnished. Obviously, it's a portrait, obviously a little bit underexposed, and they sealed it up with glass, and it looks like it was made yesterday, other than some stuff on the outside. So there is a way, kind of like daguerreotypes, you know, put a glass cover on it. There is a way to protect those and not allow those sulfides to get to it, but you need to seal it up. And that's one way to do it. That's one way you can get away with not varnishing and still protecting the image. But I mean, let's be honest, the primo thing to do is to varnish the image, do it properly, use the right compounds, let it dry and cure, and then store it or frame it, you know, all dark archival qualities or all the archival procedures or methodology that you want to preserve that image. I mean, because if you're going to go to that length of doing it, you want to make sure or be as sure as you can be as having the image last. And we know, we have proof that they'll last at least 170 years, right? We have actual empirical evidence that says if you do this, they will last, short of being broken or, you know, damaged that way. So that's kind of the varnishing area. Some that I didn't get to last week, and somebody asked if I'd talk about that. So hopefully they're either watching on YouTube or they'll get it. Jan, thank you for the tip about my silver bath. It's up, go now. Have been very clean with negative. Oh, good. So let's talk about that, Jan, just for a second. Jan wrote me and said, what about these spots? What about these spots on my plate? So he's getting pinholes. We call them pinholes. And if you do a pinhole search on any of the primary literature, they're going to talk about an over-iodized bath, silver bath. And this is a little confusing because what do we actually do? We try to flood the bath with iodides, and now we're talking about it being over-iodized. So there's this parameter in there, if you will, that you need enough iodides in the bath so it doesn't steal from the plate, and you have this flat, white, nasty-looking thing, meaning you haven't excited your bath, meaning you haven't flooded it with iodides. And yet there's a point where you go over that, and the iodides fall out of, precipitate onto the plate, dissolve, and create these little tiny pinholes. So they're clear glass, or they're black spots on a tin type, or whatever. They're little tiny pinholes everywhere. And they're terrible for negatives, because negatives printed show everything on the print. Yes. Yes, yeah.
I make myself a new bath, one liter, new silver bath.
Okay.
And I take 1 deciliter, 100 milliliter in the new silver bath. And I also took a plate, 5/7 plate, and have a collodion, and sensitize the bath for 5 hours. But that was too much. That was too much, because I have it was over saturated, because I take it from the silver bath, the plate, I see dots. I see dots on the collodion layer. So because of all iodizing problems. Yes. So I sun it for 3 days now, filter it, and everything okay. So I understand now I'm doing negative. I must have 2 baths, one backup all the time to change.
Yes. I recommend that for sure. That's good. Yeah. So that's one way to tackle it. The other way to tackle it is what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of iodides in the bath so it doesn't produce those pinholes, but still has enough iodides to produce a good plate. What I recommend, and if you've ever experienced this, and I'm sure you have if you work in collodion, have you ever added, so at the end of the day or the end of the week, your 1,000 milliliters is down to 800 milliliters in your silver bath, and you add some distilled water and you pour that distilled water in, it gets cloudy and milky and blue. Those are iodides precipitating out. The quickest way to fix that is to add a little bit of silver in it and have the silver take up those iodides and mix with that and create that solution so it's balanced. When we're over iodized and we're getting pinholes, I recommend people add 1/3 of their bath. So basically 320 mils on 1,000 mils. You pour that in, it'll go cloudy, blue, you sun it, those iodides will pull out, precipitate out, pull out. You measure your bath again. You can actually let that water evaporate if you want, that additional water, bring it down to around 1,100 or 1,000 mils again, reconstitute it with some silver nitrate, and your bath is now level. You don't need to sensitize it again with a collodion plate. It still has enough iodides in it to do just fine, and you'll get rid of that pinhole problem. The other way is to really go hardcore, add an alkaline solution, a baking soda, ammonia, whatever you want to do, and really drop those things out of there. That's super hardcore, and you'll clean your bath up really well. So those are some methods to get rid of those pinholes. You normally won't see pinholes on a bath for a very, very long time, unless you've done something to really jack those iodides up. So, over a lot of NH4I or a lot of Ki in your collodion or something like that would really make those iodides go out of control. But normally it's a very long time before you see pinholes. Boguslav says, how do you remove old varnish for redeveloping negative? Is it safe for emulsion? That's a great question, Boguslav. That's one of the things that I teach in workshops. So if you don't, negative or positive, it doesn't matter. Let's just say varnishing period. If you have a bad varnish job, meaning you have dust, you have orange peel, you have whatever, when you think about this, what we're doing is we're pouring this thick sap or compound on. We're draining the majority of it off, and then we're getting it over heat to get most of that water out of the alcohol, in this case, gum sandrack, let's say, and you're starting to dry it and cure it, that process. And so you have, although it's a micro layer of varnish on the plate, it protects the silver, right? You can still have those imperfections. And if they look nasty or they're going to interfere with printing or just visually, aesthetically not pleasing, after that plate is dried, not cured, just dried, after you've had it over the flame or in your toaster, whatever you do, you look at that and you look to the side, man, there's little bits of hair and little spots everywhere. Say, man, this is a great plate and I want to revarnish it. How do I do it? This is how I teach people how to revarnish a plate. First, you need to soften that micro layer of varnish. And those imperfections are usually going to be right on top of that varnish. So I use isopropyl alcohol, 70, 90%, whatever you have. Pour it on, swish it around the plate. I know this is scary because people leave it on too long and they melt their image off this way too. But swish it around, let it soften the top of that little micro layer of varnish on there, drain it off. Do that once or twice. And what you're doing is you're just taking a little bit of that varnish away and getting those imperfections. Don't go all the way through the varnish, just once or twice until those imperfections are cleared off. And if it turns blue, don't worry about that. That's the water and the alcohol interacting with the gum. Gum sandrack, if you're using gum sandrack and water don't get along very well, especially in large quantities of water. It'll have that blue haze. Don't worry about that. Dry it off. Take your varnish and varnish the plate again in a cleaner environment, a better filtered varnish, lower humidity, whatever the problem was. So you can revarnish plates. You can take those top layers off with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol or regular alcohol, whatever you want to use. I use the cheaper stuff because alcohol is very expensive here. But all you're trying to do is clear those imperfections off, just the very, very top of it. Do it a couple of times, let it dry and revarnish. I've tried this 3 or 4 times. I've done this with plates just to see how far I could go. And I've never had any problem. So once that silver's covered, and as long as you don't pour the alcohol on it and just leave it sit there, because it'll dissolve all that varnish away, and then it'll hit your nitrocellulose and silver, and it'll get rid of it quick, right? It'll melt that image. So you can experiment with revarnishing with a test plate before you do it with the real plates. It used to scare me big time doing it. It doesn't anymore. I try to prevent the problem by having a good environment and everything right, varnishing. Sometimes you just don't have that happen, so you need to do that. But that's a good question. It is safe to do it. It's just you need to watch that first initial removal of those top layers of varnish. Don't let the alcohol sit on there too long. Put it on, keep a meniscus on there, work it around a little bit and drain it off. And then see if your imperfections are still there or not. Put another one on. Do it a couple of times and then let it dry and revarnish the plate. You'll be surprised. It works very well. Or I've had very good luck with it anyway. So yeah, those are great questions. Varnishing is a big deal. I know people ask, I probably get a half a dozen emails a month just on varnishing alone, on either problems or what do I do or what varnish to use. It doesn't really matter what varnish, again, doesn't matter what varnish you use. It just depends on your situation, what works best for you, your particular type of image making. Everybody's a little different. It varies a little bit. So yeah, no problem. Last time I washed an alcohol, so long emulsion. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. He said last time and washed it too long and dissolved the nitrocellulose. Alcohol is strong, a very, very powerful solvent. It will get rid of collodion, nitrocellulose, and the silver will go with it, the image, very, very fast. So that's the only thing you have to watch. Just do it. Sometimes so I've literally done this before. I've had a tin type, pour some isopropyl alcohol on it to revarnish it, swish it around for 5 or 10 seconds, drain it off. That's all it took. And that was good to go. So sometimes it's really fast. It depends on the environment that you do that initial varnish in. If you get thick varnish on there and those imperfections are embedded a little deeper, it might take 1, 2, or 3 times. If it's thin, it might only take once and really fast. You just have to experiment with that a little bit and figure it out. I say play it safe. Do it quickly the first time. Don't let it sit on there too long. It doesn't take much, and try to see if your imperfections are gone. But it works really well. It does. And I started teaching that in workshops a long while back because people tended to have, especially when they first started making plates, varnishing tended to be a thorn in their side or difficult for them longer than anything else. Even how they developed, exposure, all that, varnishing kept being a problem for a longer time. So I decided we should probably incorporate that in and tell people how to do that and let them try it. But very safe to do. Just don't let it sit too long on there because it will heat those things away for sure. So yeah, I'm anything else? I have my daughter and her husband up and a friend. We had a nice little, you want to see our campfire from last night? There's our campfire. Built a little stone campfire. They were out here until about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm an old man, so I have to go to bed around 10 or 11. So I went in and went to bed, but they were out here, had a nice little campfire and chopping wood. And so we're just having a little get together today. I think the neighbor is going to come over. They might even be here now, but we don't really do any celebrations. We like to hang out with family and friends. So anything else? If you guys want to chat, I'll hang around. If we're good to go, we'll maybe send me some questions for next week or have some ideas. Come in, share something. We'll get together again next Saturday and kind of hang out and see. I know I figured this would be a slow weekend. I don't. Thilo, are you European? Where are you at? Are you in the States or are you in Europe?
I'm in Japan.
Oh, in Japan. Well, welcome. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, I figured mostly would be non-U.S. people in here because I don't know, they're all lighting fireworks and eating hot dogs today or something. I don't know what they're doing. So, oh, Henrik, he says, how does the wet plate react if not washed enough? That's a great question. Let's address that because that's another great archival question. We go through all this work. We want our plates to survive with varnishing and all that other stuff. So what happens if you don't wash a plate long enough? Just like in the old silver gelatin or gelatin silver paper printing days, which is really weird to say because that's all he did for all those decades. What happens if you don't fix and wash the print long enough? It's the same thing. You have silver left over there, unexposed silver, mixed with the fix generally, and exposure to light, that plate will go dark. It will darken down, just like the print, gelatin silver print that's not fixed and washed long enough. Same with the pot prints, especially the pot prints that aren't fixed and washed long enough. Washing is very critical. One of the reasons people always ask me, why do you use such a dangerous chemical like potassium cyanide? One of the reasons I use KCN or potassium cyanide to fix the plates with is because it's fast, effective, and it takes very little wash time to be archival, meaning it doesn't embed like ammonium or sodium thiosulfate does with the silver, unexposed silver, to remove it. It doesn't embed in there. It takes a long time to wash that out. So KCN has a lot of advantages, but one of big advantage is short wash times, especially when you're out in the field. You're out in the mountains, out in the fields, forests, whatever, making plates. You can put a plate fixed in KCN or potassium cyanide in a still wash pan for 5 minutes, and you're good. where it would be 20 or 30 minutes in pretty, at least somewhat running water for sodium thiosulfate. It takes more force and a lot more water. So the water usage, the time, and then ultimately the archivability of the plate. You will go dark. It's really easy to leave that in there and not have sufficient wash times after fixing. So think about as the old gelatin silver prints and how that affects the print in the end. It's devastating to go through all that and then you don't complete those final steps, whether it's washing the print or the plate or varnishing it properly or whatever it is. It's hard to see an image go dark on you like that. So make sure and again, if it's a safety concern, if it's whatever it is, if you're using a sodium thiosulfate or ammonium thiosulfate for fix, make sure you wash sufficiently because you will have those plates turn on you if you don't. KCN, potassium cyanide for a fix, you can get away with a lot. I mean, I've barely rinsed those things off before and they hold up. And it's an amazing compound. I know it's dangerous. I know it's difficult to get all that stuff, but it's really, there's a reason they used that in the 19th century primarily. There's a reason for that. And they knew that. They were a lot more careless with it than we are. And sodium thiosulfate I use for print fix, of course. That's what you have to use. You can't use KCN. So printing, water usage, here in America, especially in some of these Western high dry states, water's an issue. Water conservation is a big issue. It's on my mind. I don't like to, leave the taps running and all that stuff. It's a problem. I mean, we can bring in all kinds of reasons why we don't do things in these processes. And environmental stuff is high on the list, and you probably call me a hypocrite by just saying I use KCN. But I neutralize that. I take care of my chemicals. I dispose of them properly, all that stuff. So I am concerned about water usage, environmental issues, and those kinds of things. So all those years that I used C41 color film processes, E6s and the bleaches, the chrome processes, Chrome processing, all those years I used that stuff. The damage we were doing to the environment, those chemicals are far worse than anything we use in this process. This process is quite mild, and especially if you take concern with it, you won't have issues like that much. You just want to be concerned about how much of the environment, you're not dumping your chemicals out, running your water nonstop, those kinds of things. It's doable. I think it's manageable, and I love the process so much. I don't think nothing would ever stop me from doing it. I'd try to find a way. So, but wash those plates well. That's a great question, Henrik. That's a very good one. So I think we will call that a day. It's almost 11 o'clock and it's warmed up to 20 degrees here, 21 degrees. So the day's on. You guys have a great time, great weekend. I appreciate you coming and hanging out with me for a bit. Join me next week. Send your questions or come in and share something. We'll hang out again on Saturday next time if you can. You're very welcome, Henrik. Have a great day. Wonderful weekend. Be safe, guys. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.